The Dark Angels, the first Space Marine Legion. And I have a soft spot for them because they look an awful lot like my Space Marines, the Black Templar. They're very grim and gothic. And gothic is something that's actually kind of missing often from the Space Marines. Even though they are the 40k thing, they don't really look that grim dark. But the Dark Angels, they look grim dark. I'm gonna paint one today. The Dark Angels are my kind of Space Marines. I mean, all Space Marines are knightly orders, but the Dark Angels are literally Space Knights. The point of Space Marines is that they are Iron Man suits based on medieval armor. I took a Marine body from the Assault Intercessors kit for the cool pose, and then I hopped over to the regular Intercessor box to get the weapons. I chose the reloading arm, but I don't want to have him reloading, just cradling his weapon like a football. So I cut off a magazine and then glued it into position. Then for his right arm, I picked pointing. Usually when I'm building a squad, my instincts are to make them all in guns pointed forward poses, but now that I'm focusing only on one guy, I feel like I have a little bit more freedom to try something more characterful. I drilled out his bolter barrel with my hobby drill, doing a big hole right in the middle and then a little hole through the side, and now he's perfect. I've got my regular old Intercessor here, and it's time to turn him into a Dark Angels Intercessor, and to do that, I'm gonna be pulling some bits from one of my all-time favorite Space Marine kits, a Space Marine kit I think everyone should own, and that is the Black Templar Sword Brethren. This is not just for Black Templar players. I think this is for every single Space Marine player because it is 5 epic Space Marine bodies with decorations and tabards. It comes with optional capes. It comes with all kinds of extra bits, close combat and ranged weapons out the wazoo. If you want to build like captains, lieutenant with combi weapon, chaplains, you could build 5 epic heroes out of this box and then still have tons and tons of things left over for awesome bits. In this kit, I stole a knightly helmet perfect for the Dark Angels and then went back to the Intercessor's box for some shoulder pads. I would also like to note that the normal shoulder pads, the most numerous and repeatable part in the kit, happens to be part number 69. Coincidence? I think not. Also from the Intercessor's box, I stole a little reliquary. Why do Space Marines carry around bones? I don't know. I glued on these shoulder pads and reliquary, and then I cleaned up the nubbies on his power plant in preparation to add a little bit of grim darkness. Digging through my collection of epic basing bits, there are these little candles and candelabras. I clipped these off and sanded them down to match the rounded backpack, and then I mixed up some milliput. I glued down the candles, melted over a skull onto the shoulder, and then spread out some milliput to squish the other candles onto. Once I was happy with the spread, I took a toothpick and my sculpting tools and I mushed the putty down to make it look like dripping wax. I don't have to get this perfect, as I can fix a lot of it with painting. I just need to join the two materials together. Now, in thinking about how to base this sucker, it made me think of the Dark Angels homeworld of Caliban. Now, Caliban is a pretty cool place. Or rather, it's a really horrible place, but that was what makes it so cool. And so Caliban was a planet really close to the Eye of Terror. And that meant that warp shenanigans would happen, and so any creatures that lived on that planet would kind of get transformed into horrible monstrosities. And the Caliban people, the Calibanians, the Calibanitos, if you will, they had to grow up big and strong in order to deal with all of these horrible warp monstrosities. And that's why they were the first Space Marine recruits, because they were tough. And they were actually sent off into the Great Crusade initially to purge the galaxy of any aliens. Now, Caliban was destroyed during the Great Crusade, and in the rubble of the planet Caliban, they built a satellite fortress monastery called the Rock. And from the perspective of the Imperium, it's just their chapter keep. But from the perspective of the Dark Angels, it is a secret maximum security prison where they house the Fallen, those Dark Angels who turned away from the Emperor's light. Inside the Rock is all of the traitorous Dark Angels who have not yet repented, and tons of other super secret MacGuffins that only the upper echelon of the Dark Angels know about. Now, I don't really want to set this guy on the Rock, but I do think it gives me some ideas because I don't think the Dark Angels are going to look great on like a normal foresty landscape. I think they need a little bit of urban rubble to really show off their knightly heraldry. I once again raided my epic basing bits bin and found some rubble. I glued these down, making a floor of bricks, and then piled up some more detritus. I glued down his feet so I knew there was room, and then I fixed any gaps with leftover milliput. Then I sprinkled on some scaled bricks, locking them down with ultra-thin superglue, and my Dark Angel is now wandering through a dark and desolate, destroyed landscape. My cute Widow Dark Angel is ready for painting, and whenever I paint up another Space Marine chapter, I like to pretend that I am playing those Space Marines. And so I read their codex, and I look at them, and I compare them to my Black Templar, and I try to put together a little synergy that I can't with my Templars. And one unit that is often overlooked in the Space Marine Codex is Stern Guard Veterans. They're basically just regular intercessors, but they have devastating wounds on their bolters. And now devastating wound bolters isn't phenomenal because it's a low volume number of shots, but the Dark Angels can kick it up a notch. I would bring 10 Stern Guard Veterans with attached to Azrael. Azrael gives you a command point a turn, and he gives you sustained hits 1 on all your bolters, so exploding 6s. And then I would also attach an Apothecary. Now usually you don't take an Apothecary, they're fine, but getting one guy back a turn for 50 points isn't worth it. But for only 50 points, and then for only 15 more points, he can take a Relic. Stubborn Tenacity, which gives you +1 to hit for the squad. Really good for only 15 points. So all of a sudden, this squad is hitting on 2s, and then you start fishing for those 6s. And just a really good number of shots in general. Now, if you're shooting outside of 12 inches, you're gonna get about 3 mortal wounds, and if you're shooting within 12 inches, you're gonna get probably about 5. But the real juice is a little stratagem. Grim Retribution. In your opponent's turn, if something shoots at that squad and kills a guy or more, you get to shoot back like it's your shooting phase. That super changes the scope of this unit. All of a sudden, you're doing way more than it ordinarily would. And with the devastating wounds, it means that you can't really have bad matchups, because even if it's something like a Gladiator Reaper or something, that ordinarily, like, who cares if I shoot my bolters at it, they're all gonna ping off. Those devastating wounds mean that you're going to do guaranteed damage. So it's kind of worth doing, and it's worth doing again and again and again. And just as the cherry on top, Azrael gives you a free command point a turn, so you might as well do it. That is a really fun combo. Is it the best? I don't know, but I wanna run it. And I wanna paint this Dark Angel. I primed the mini black and then zenithalled him with white paint from above. I have taken to using my dirtiest airbrush for priming, and then the airbrush I actually clean once in a while I use for the white so that I get a smooth spray. Now for the armor. I picked Gunner Camo Army Painter Speed Paint, and I thinned this down and put it over all the armor. The Dark Angels are pretty easy. They are about 100% green. Now that I've got nice dark recesses, I want to cover up all of the remaining white Zenithal base coat showing through, so I sprayed some thinned down Ghoul Green through my airbrush. This is a blue-green color, and over top of the previous green, I think this combo makes for the perfect Calibanian green. In my opinion, the way Games Workshop paints Dark Angels takes away all of their grim gothic presence. Edge highlighting everything with neon green makes them feel very Tron-y and sci-fi, instead of grim green knights. I plan to go a different route. I put light gray and lime green on my palette, and then I sponged on these two colors. This catches in all the raised areas and gives them a battle-worn texture, like his armor has been pelted by 100 bullets and blades, and the only damage it's taken is a loss of a little bit of paint. Then I loaded up my brush with the lime green paint and did a few edge highlights only on the raised areas, not on every single edge of the model. I only hit about 15% with these highlights. Now his armor is done, I want to paint the red parts, and for some reason, every time I work with blood red paint, I manage to spill it everywhere. After I cleaned up, I put this over his candles, his bolter, and I thinned it down and started layering it over his eye holes, doing layers of smaller and smaller circles to make it look like his eyes are glowing. And after that, I put some pure red onto my palette, and I picked out his pupils and painted the rim around his eyes to further accentuate this glow. I did the same thing with orange paint, being very sparing, and in the end, I think his eyes look spooky. Those eyes are the last thing seen by many Xenos, heretics, and mutants. I highlighted his bolter using all the same colors, and for the candles, I highlighted these with my dry brush, and the lovely texture of the epic basing bits took this paint beautifully. Those candles really jump off the model. And to finish them off, I painted the flames yellow with a little drop of white paint on the tippy top of each one. I put some brown speed paint over the skulls, doing a few layers so it was darker on the bottom and lighter on top. And I did a few highlights with a bone color that I also put on his chest Imperialis and the little baby Imperialis on his shoulder pad, and on his knee. I washed these areas with the brown to make them look dirty and dingy. He's a grim gothic marine, nothing gets cleaned often. And to further exaggerate the texture of these details, I gave him the coat of Agrex Earthshade. On his knee, I went back to my red paints and gave him a checker to add a little medieval flair to this knight, and I finished off the bone colored decorations with the dry brushing of tan. On his holy bolter, I gave all the non-red parts a coat of Rattling Grime contrast paint, which I also put on the in-between parts of his armor, and I put gold onto his reliquary and onto the skull of his bolter. I washed the gold paint with Nuln Oil and gave the Rattling Grime a dry brushing of silver paint. Rattling Grime plus silver paint is one of my all-time favorite hobby combos. I put some gloss paint over his shoulder pads in preparation for decals. I was lucky enough to have a few in my collection. I cut off an assault arrow and a Dark Angel symbol. I let those soak for a minute on my palette, and then I slid them into place, crushing them flat with a damp ball of paper towel to squeeze out any trapped air and water. Then I sponged on some dark green paint to make these symbols look as chipped and weathered as the rest of the armor, and this little guy was all painted up. My Knight of Caliban is all painted up, and I think I achieved my goal of moving away from the Games Workshop clean look and into the territory of grim dark. And speaking of grim dark, those candles though. Oh, I like them a lot. I do a ton of work with candles for my Black Templar army, and I always paint them candle color. There's something to the red that gives them a lot of presence, and I really, really like it. Now, the only thing left to do is tell you about our Patreon. Over there, we have a fresh set of terrain every month, and this month we have the Dark Elf Encampment. Soar through the air in the Marauder, and then set up camp with the Pleasure Tents, Arena Walls, and the Pleasure Portal. This is a set of characterful terrain pieces and wonderful accessories for the discerning elf. To finish off this mini, I gotta do the base. I managed to keep the base mostly clean. I did a little dry brushing of white to bring out the details and cover up the little bit of green overspray I did, and then it was onto the base coats. And one trick that I found that is fun for base coats is to base coat with 2 different colors. I chose a blue-gray and a red-brown speed paint combo, and I brushed these onto the base randomly so that it would dry with a patchy, blended, mottled complexion. Once that was dry, I dry brushed the base with some mid-tone gray, mid-tone so that the base doesn't get overly bright and pull any focus away from the Dark Angel. Then I painted the rim of the base black using my glossy apple barrel black paint. I really like the Dark Angels, and you know why? It's because they're basically Black Templar. They're Black Templar, but a couple of hues removed. But just as Space Marines, they're a pretty cool version of Space Marine because they're essentially 3 armies in one. They're just like normal Ultramarines, but with some more cool characters like Lazarus and Ezekiel. But then if you go into their Deathwing, they become a really, really cool Terminator-focused army. And if they become the Darkwing, then they become a really, really cool biker army. So just in this one little collection of green Space Marines, they have a lot of play, and it was really fun painting this guy up and reading all of their rules. Let me know in the comments below what Space Marines I should take a look at next and which ones I should paint up, because I'm really enjoying the collection of like rainbow Space Marines that is growing bigger and bigger on my shelf. So let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.